All right, so in this video, we'll be looking at the chest and the pelvic girdle. Probably should have put the chest in the last video, but that'll be okay. So sometimes the chest is called the thoracic cage, which is probably a better term for it. We think about our rib cage. Thoracic means chest, so this is just the chest cavity or the thoracic cage. All those terms are fine. You can see here the different parts of the chest cavity or the thoracic cage. Here in the center is the sternum. The sternum is a flat bone, and it's actually resulting from the fusion of three different bones. And you can see those bones here in bold. The manubrium, may even have a separate picture of the sternum. Here we go. The manubrium, which is this top bone, you can see that it articulates with that first rib in particular. And also with the clavicles, that clavicular notch. The body, which is most of the manubrium, and you can see it has several rib attachments here as well. And then the xiphoid process, which is this little tab down here, serves as muscle attachments for the abdomen. And this xiphoid process doesn't actually complete its changing into bone until well into adulthood, or can do that. For the ribs, let's see if we go back to this one. Actually, I like this one better. There are 12 pairs of ribs on either side, and there are 7 pairs of ribs that are attached directly to the sternum, as you can see that here. And they have these individual, what are called costal cartilages. All this blue here that you see is called the costal cartilages, and they attach the ribs to the sternum. And these are called true ribs, these ribs that attach directly to the sternum. And then there are other ribs, these remaining 5 ribs down here, and including these. These are called false ribs. They attach indirectly to the sternum, or like these 2 ribs down here have no actual sternal attachment. These 2 pairs down here, pairs 11 and 12, are known as floating ribs because they don't actually attach to anything. They're just kind of floating back there, which seems kind of strange if you think about it. For the pelvis or the pelvic girdle, this whole thing, well, this middle part is part of the backbone. There's the sacrum and the coccyx, but this whole odd-shaped bone here, there's actually 6 bones here, but there's 2 pieces here as adults. This is known as the pelvic girdle, and they are formed, again, it's formed by the sacrum that joins here with that. Some of you have probably had SI joint problems. This is the sacroiliac joint that you have. If you feel it in your lower back, you can have pain back there. And that's what the SI joint is, sacroiliac joint. And these hip bones are oftentimes called coxal bones instead of hip bones. You can see that here, this coxal bone or coxae. And they attach the lower limbs to the axial skeleton, and they transmit the full weight of the upper body to the lower limbs. And so that's a very important thing because a lot of that weight needs to be transferred. And they also support the visceral organs of the pelvis. And so urinary organs, reproductive organs, all of that is being supported by these hip bones. They are attached to, again, we mentioned the sacroiliac joint. The ligaments that make this attachment here are some of the strongest in the body. So they're really hard to move, but if you do move them, it's really, really painful. The leg socket down here is also a very strong joint, and it is analogous to the shoulder joint we talked about in the last video, the glenoid cavity. But this was much deeper. This is a much stronger socket, but it has given up mobility in order to be that. So your leg, or for most of us anyway, some people have weird kinds of flexibility, but for most of us, your leg is much less flexible than your shoulder. And this joint here is called the acetabulum. Is how you pronounce that word, the acetabulum. And you have a really strong bone that comes in here and kind of hooks into that socket. And so we'll look at the 3 different hip bones here. You can see here, here, and here. Notice there's not really a joint there. As you become older, they fuse together and just kind of form one joint, but they're still referred to as three different pieces. This top part is called the ilium. And when you like put your hands on your hips, that top part of your hip, that is what you're feeling there, the ilium. And the ischium is the bottom portion here, and it's kind of this arched shape here. This is the lower back portion of the hip, and this is when you sit down, most of the weight is being put on this ischium here. And then the pubis is the anterior portion of the hip, and the pubis joins, or this pubis joins to this pubis in the middle at what is called the pubic symphysis, this joint here. And there's a lot of pressure on this joint. And one thing that's interesting is this opening, which is between males and females for reasons of childbirth. You can see here in the male, the angle here is much more acute. It gives some actual measurements there, 50 to 60 degrees more acute. The hip bones are typically larger to support a lot more weight, but this opening is a lot smaller. And so with females, the bones are lighter, but this opening is much bigger to allow for childbirth. And so if you look at the skeleton that's in my classroom, for instance, you can see that it is a female because of the angles here, this much more rounded area here as opposed to this very acute area there.